If you were expecting my next Bleach video to be talking about the next part of the manga, so was I, until a few days ago. This first time read through of Bleach apparently also has filler now. Sorry, but it's surprisingly worth it. Okay, so as many of you know, I've been both reading the Bleach manga for the first time and watching the corresponding anime episodes that cover the canon material, thanks to the list right here. Obviously, the anime still adds some things in even during those episodes. The one that stuck out most for me was that random Soul Reaper guy during the Memories in the Rain episodes that absolutely had no business being there. But I've done my best to avoid filler episodes and filler arcs, but something happened recently, guys. I was watching the anime during a workout and got to the moment when they're about to get to Las Noches, and something very different happens in the story than what I read in the manga. Our resident Sandman Runaganga returns and drops our characters into a pit just when they're about to reach their destination. I was legitimately surprised at the end of that episode and thrown off, and then looked at the filler episode list. Sure enough, this apparently launched a little mini filler arc. Usually I would skip it, but I was really curious to see where they went and how they were going to get back on the story's actual track. So I decided to at least check it out and see if it was anything interesting to watch while exercising, and I'm super glad I did. These filler episodes turned out to be a very pleasant surprise for me. It didn't feel like a waste of time or feel inconsistent with the world like a lot of anime filler does. Like, remember when One Piece was suddenly all about dragons for 10 episodes, like decades before dragons were actually introduced to the story? Yeah. So when I texted my friend Henry, who's been a Bleach fan for a very, very long time, he said there's good reason that this anime filler arc feels like it kind of belongs. According to Tite Kubo himself, this part of the story was originally going to be in the manga. This detour into the Menos forest with Ashido was originally going to be canon. The concept of a forest of hollows beneath the dunes of Hueco Mundo, along with the star character of this little story arc, Ashido, were conceptualized by Kubo himself, but he didn't have time to actually include this in the manga. So the only thing that separates Ashido and his beautiful wildlife is time constraints. But you can almost feel how well this could have been integrated, because a lot of it feels like a natural side quest, where in the manga it could have been just a couple of chapters to explore another part of Hueco Mundo. I can see why it wasn't prioritized maybe, or why it ended up on the cutting room floor, but some of it was really great stuff. So let's talk about why these episodes were much better than I could have guessed, considering how infamous Bleach filler stories apparently are. Which I've already decided, by the way, that once I finish the manga, I'm gonna go back and watch full filler arcs. This right here was just a small little accidental exception. Anyway, let's get into it a bit. For one thing, the Menos forest is awesome. I love the idea of the subterranean haunted forest where the trees that we saw up on the surface in the desert are actually just the tops of these massive crystallized branches from under the sand, the top of the Menos forest. I especially like the notion that the whole forest is really just a nest of hollows. It's so wonderfully creepy. The more powerful hollows reside above and the weaker ones below. These aren't the Arankars and the Espada patrolling a palace. These are wild, hungry, spectral beasts like the more traditional hollows I know and love, and they're just doing whatever they can to eat and survive in this ecosystem. The Menos forest also just helps to further emphasize the dichotomy of Hueco Mundo as a whole. You've got places like these woods or the desert above it where hollows are still kind of hunting and scavenging, but then you've got Las Noches with its tidy hallways, its conference rooms, and its tea. So far, Aizen's palace seems like this isolated piece of quote-unquote civilization. It just makes me wonder if it's always been this way, or this is a result of Aizen's presence. Is Las Noches the result of a rogue Soul Reaper coming to these lands to colonize? Was Las Noches always there? Has Aizen started to completely change everything about this environment? Like, is it a matter of him taking these hollows, dragging them out of the wilderness, and then throwing a proverbial business suit on them to make them attend his board meetings? There's so much about Hueco Mundo that can be explored, and I'm glad that we at least got a little more of that, even if it's in another medium. Kubo's concepts were still able to find a home somewhere for us to enjoy, and that's great. And then there's the lone warrior surviving in the wild, man versus this different kind of nature, Ashido. And his backstory is tragic. He was a Soul Reaper that pursued Hollows into Hueco Mundo with his team. Unfortunately, they were overwhelmed in the ensuing battle, and he watched all of his friends die in front of him. Since then, he's been a little bit traumatized, and he's been in Hueco Mundo for centuries, constantly fighting off Hollows day in and day out to both honor his dead friends' memories and to maintain his honor as a Soul Reaper. The part that really stuck with me though is that this man chooses to remain in Hueco Mundo to hunt Hollows at their source, trying to kill as many as possible so that less of them will be able to go to the living world and hurt people. He's a Soul Reaper who has stuck to his duty of protecting souls. He's sacrificed his entire existence to protecting people that don't even know he exists, like no one knows he's even here until now. And then the worst part is, he hears that Hollow activity in the living world hasn't actually changed that much, and might even be worse than ever. So to hear that his one-man guerrilla war against the Hollows hasn't made a difference at all, but he keeps fighting anyway, it's really powerful stuff. Like this guy, he is a real hero. And Ashido also just looks badass. You can almost tell that he was meant to be canon because he's got Kubo's wonderful design sensibilities all over him. His appearance effortlessly displays the more wild aspects of him, wearing a hollow pelt with all of these hollow masks all over him. The one mask that he actually puts on his face, being the mask of the last Hollow his friends defeated, is a great touch too. And with his robes being frayed and torn, he just looks like someone that's had to completely integrate himself into this new life, an unending purgatory that he's been stuck in. Ashido's a very serious individual who's still dealing with the trauma of what happened to him, but that's understandable considering how intense it is. I also really loved that it was Rukia that bonded with Ashido, because out of everyone there, she's the one that understands what it's like to lose a comrade and a friend to the evil that Hollows can bring about. So there was just kind of a feeling of understanding between them that wasn't really, dived into a lot, but it was coming from a place of understanding on her part. He's just one of those non-canon characters like Senna from Memories of Nobody, where they just kind of seamlessly ingratiate themselves and make you want to see more of them. Like, I wanted to see Ashido leave the Menos forest with our characters at the end to carry on with them, even though I knew that it wouldn't and couldn't happen since this is all filler. But that's the sign of a successful filler character, where you wish they really were part of the actual story. This also gave us just more time for Hollows and Hollow action, which is always my jam. As much as I like the Arrancar, I love me some simple animalistic Hollows just wanting to eat some lunch. The Hollows here are portrayed more threateningly than usual, mostly just by the sheer number of them, but I also just love how unnerving the Menos Grande look in the forest too. They're just about as tall as the trees around them, which gives this feeling that any one of those trunks could actually be a Hollow. The forest itself is trying to eat you. The actual villains here aren't exactly spectacular as bad guys, but they're Hollows, and I'm me, so I appreciate them as if they were my own children. Just the ones whose names I forget and who I probably won't remember. But even so, I would still take them over some of the villains in the movies I've seen so far. So Ashido ends up choosing to stay behind to continue his one-man crusade against the Hollows of Hueco Mundo, and it's kind of depressing that he doesn't get to leave with our heroes. Of course he wasn't going to, but it's still sad to know that with whatever comes next in the story for everyone else, Ashido is going to be right here, fighting day after day, just one man trying to make a difference in the universe. I thoroughly enjoyed these episodes, guys. They really felt organically tied into everything happening in the canon, with Ashido explaining how Hollows have been changing recently and wondering what could have happened to change Hueco Mundo and make it even worse. Like, yes, this is an unnecessary detour in the journey to Las Noches, but it's one that's very interesting and builds on Hueco Mundo's world and is anchored by the kind of character we've never seen in the story before. Like, if I didn't read the manga and only watched the anime, I could see myself thinking that this little story was absolutely part of the manga. It's got a great concept, wonderful designs, and some good world building. It really is just an example of filler done right. Including the things that circumstance didn't allow the creator to put onto the page, expanding the story in an overall natural kind of way, that's the best kind of filler. So I'm glad I stumbled onto this. It was a worthwhile walk through the forest. Now let's get back on the canon path, where none of this ever happened, even if I wish it did. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Please comment, like, subscribe, and I promise we'll get back to the actual story next video.